General Arthur Sterling had faced enemy fire without blinking, but the silence in Operating Room 4 was deafening. Bleeding from a jagged shrapnel wound that threatened to end his career, he had screamed at the hospital director, demanding only the absolute best surgeon in the state. He expected a grey-haired veteran. He expected deference. What he didn't expect was the woman who walked through the double doors, snapping latex gloves onto her hands with terrifying precision. When her cold blue eyes met his, the general's face drained of color. The heart monitor spiked violently. He didn't just know her. He had destroyed her life 10 years ago. Or so he thought. The automatic doors of Mercy General Hospital didn't just slide open. They were practically thrown off their tracks by the sheer force of the entourage bursting through. It was 2:00 a.m. in Seattle, raining hard enough to drown out the city noise, but nothing could drown out the chaos erupting in the emergency bay. "Clear the hallway. Now move it." The shouting came from a towering military police officer. His uniform soaked his face, a mask of panic and aggression. Behind him, flanked by 4 armed guards, a gurney was being rushed forward with frantic urgency. On it lay a man who looked less like a patient and more like a wounded lion, waiting to bite the throat of anyone who dared help him. General Arthur Sterling, the Iron Hammer of the Pentagon, a man whose tactical brilliance was only matched by his legendary arrogance. "Get your hands off me, you incompetent fool!" Arthur roared, swatting away the hand of a young resident trying to apply pressure to his side. The general's dress uniform was torn, stained dark crimson from the hip down. A training accident involving a malfunctioned prototype explosive had sent a shard of jagged titanium deep into his pelvic iliac artery. It was a kill shot if not handled perfectly, and Arthur knew it. "Sir, you are losing blood rapidly." The resident, Dr. Lewis, stammered, his glasses sliding down his nose. "We need to. I don't care what you need." Arthur gritted his teeth, the pain making his vision swim. He grabbed the resident by the scrub collar, pulling him down. "I need the best. Do you hear me? I was promised the best trauma center on the West Coast. Where is the chief of surgery? Where is the legend? Dr. Henry Cole." The hospital director came running down the hall, clutching a clipboard. He looked as if he'd been woken from a deep sleep, his tie crooked. "General Sterling." Cole gasped, signaling the nurses to prep Trauma Room 1. "We have you. We're going to stabilize you." "Stabilize?" Arthur scoffed, wincing as the gurney hit a bump. "If I lose this leg, Cole, I will bury this hospital in so much litigation, your grandchildren will be paying it off. I don't want you. I want the specialist, the one the senator told me about, the ghost hand. The one who fixes what cannot be fixed." Dr. Cole froze for a split second, exchanging a nervous glance with the head nurse, Sarah. "General," Cole said, his voice lowering, "the surgeon you are referring to is unavailable for routine trauma. She..." Arthur interrupted, his eyes narrowing despite the agony. "I don't care if it's a he, she, or a damn robot. Get them down here." The monitors attached to Arthur began to wail. His blood pressure was dropping, 80/50. He was bleeding out internally. "Get Dr. Mitchell," Cole barked at Sarah. "Page her. Code red override." Sarah hesitated. "Dr. Cole, she just finished a 12-hour reconstruction. She's in the break room. She specifically said..." "Does it look like I care about her break?" Cole hissed, wiping sweat from his forehead. "If the general dies on my floor, we're all finished. Get Clara. Now." 3 floors up in a dimly lit break room that smelled of stale coffee and antiseptic doctor. Clara Mitchell sat staring at the rain hammering against the window. She was 34, but her eyes held the weariness of someone who had lived 3 lifetimes. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy practical bun, and her scrubs were clean, though her hands still felt the phantom sensation of the warm blood from her last patient. She wasn't just a surgeon. In the medical community, she was a myth. She was the one they called when the textbooks ran out of answers. But before the medical degree, before the accolades and the ghost hand nickname, she had been something else. Lieutenant Clara Mitchell, 4th Combat Support Battalion. She closed her eyes, and for a second she wasn't in Seattle. She was back in the scorching heat of the Kandahar province. She could smell the burning rubber, the copper tang of blood, and hear the screaming. Specifically, the screaming of men abandoned by a commander who chose glory over safety. Her pager buzzed on the table, vibrating violently against the formica. She ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. Then her personal cell phone rang. It was Cole. Clara picked it up, her voice raspy. "Henry, I told you. I'm off the clock. Unless the president has been shot, don't call me." "Clara, listen to me." Henry's voice was trembling. "It's a VIP, high-ranking military. Severe shrapnel wound to the iliac. Vascular involvement. He's refusing treatment from anyone but the top surgeon. He's unstable." Clara rubbed her temples. "Military." A cold knot tightened in her stomach. She had spent 10 years avoiding the military. She had changed her specialty, changed her location, and buried her past under layers of civilian success. "Send him to the VA hospital. I don't do salutes anymore, Henry." "Clara, please," Henry begged. "He's difficult. He's threatening to shut us down. He's General Arthur Sterling." The name hit her like a physical blow. Clara stopped breathing. The phone felt heavy in her hand. The rain outside seemed to stop. Arthur Sterling, the man who had court-martialed her for saving a local child instead of securing a supply crate. The man who had stripped her of her rank, humiliated her in front of her platoon, and called her a bleeding heart liability who didn't belong in a uniform. He was the reason she had left the service in disgrace despite saving dozens of lives. He was the reason she had nightmares. "Clara, are you there?" Henry asked. A slow, terrifying calm washed over her. It was the kind of calm that comes before a hurricane. "I'm here," Clara whispered, standing up. She walked to her locker and pulled out a fresh surgical cap. "Prep the OR, Henry. Tell the general. Tell him the best is coming." Down in the trauma bay, chaos reigned. Arthur Sterling was fighting the anesthesia. He was delirious from blood loss, but holding on to his consciousness with sheer willpower. He grabbed the wrist of a nurse, trying to insert an IV. "I said, wait for the surgeon," he roared, though his voice was weakening. "Sir, you are going into shock," the nurse cried. The double doors hissed open. The room went silent. Clara walked in. She didn't run. She didn't rush. She moved with a predatory grace, her hands held up, freshly scrubbed. She wore a mask that covered the lower half of her face and a surgical cap pulled low. Only her eyes were visible. "Status," she commanded. Her voice was steel. It cut through the panic in the room like a scalpel. Dr. Lewis jumped. Doctor, shrapnel left lower quadrant. BP is 70/40. We need to clamp the artery immediately." Clara stepped up to the table. She looked down at the man thrashing on the gurney. He looked older than she remembered, greyer, but the arrogance etched into the lines of his face was exactly the same. "General Sterling," Clara said, her voice loud and clear above the beeping monitors, "if you want to live, you will let go of my nurse and lie back down." Arthur blinked, his vision blurring. He squinted at the woman standing over him. He couldn't see her face, but something about her voice, something about the authority in her tone. It scratched at a memory he had buried deep. Who are you?" Arthur wheezed. "Are you the best?" Clara looked at the monitor. His heart rate was erratic. She grabbed a sedative from the tray. "I'm the one who decides if you walk out of here or leave in a bag," she said coldly. She leaned in close to his ear as she injected the sedative into his IV port. "And you owe me, Arthur." The general's eyes went wide. He tried to speak, tried to sit up, but the drugs hit him instantly. His head lolled back, his eyes rolling up, but the look of confusion and dawning horror remained frozen on his face as he went under. "He's out," Clara said, looking up at the stunned staff. "Scalpel." The surgery took 6 hours. It was a masterpiece of vascular reconstruction. The shrapnel had nicked the artery in a way that would have killed him under any other surgeon's hands. Clara worked with a speed that frightened the residents. She didn't speak. She didn't hesitate. She repaired the damage Arthur Sterling had sustained with the same hands he had once claimed were unfit for duty. When it was over, Clara stripped off her bloody gown and gloves. She walked out of the OR, leaving Dr. Lewis to close up. She went to the scrub sink and splashed cold water on her face, staring at herself in the mirror. She had saved him. The irony tasted like bile in her throat. She had saved the monster. "Dr. Mitchell." She turned. It was Henry Cole. He looked relieved. "He's stable in the ICU," Henry said. "Great work, Clara. Truly. His aides are asking to see you. They want to thank the hero." Clara dried her hands with a paper towel, crumpling it into a tight ball. "I'm not a hero, Henry, and I'm not going to see him." "You have to," Henry said nervously. "He's awake, and he's asking for you by name." "Well, not by name. He's asking for the voice. He says he knows you." Clara froze. He recognized her voice. "Tell him I'm busy," Clara said, heading for the door. "Clara, wait." Henry stepped in front of her. "He's not just a general. He's being vetted for Secretary of Defense. If you walk away now, it looks bad. Just go in, check his vitals, take the compliment, and leave. Please, for the hospital." Clara clenched her jaw. She could leave. She should leave. But a dark part of her wanted to see his face when he realized who exactly held his life in her hands. She wanted to see the iron hammer break. "Fine," Clara said, her eyes flashing. "I'll see him." She walked toward the ICU. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly. Outside the general's private suite, 2 armed guards stood at attention. They stepped aside as she approached, intimidated by the aura she projected. She pushed the door open. The room was quiet, filled with the rhythmic hum of life support. General Arthur Sterling lay in the bed, pale and weak, but his eyes were open. He was staring at the ceiling, his mind clearly working through the fog of anesthesia. When he heard the door, he turned his head. Clara stood at the foot of the bed. She wasn't wearing a mask now. Her face was fully visible. The scar on her chin, a souvenir from a roadside bomb in Iraq, caught the light. Arthur squinted. He looked at her scrubs, then at her face. He blinked once, twice. The color that had returned to his face suddenly vanished again. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He tried to push himself up his heart monitor, beginning to beep faster. Beep, beep, beep. Nurse. Mitchell. He whispered the name, sounding foreign and impossible on his tongue. Clara folded her arms across her chest. She didn't smile. She didn't salute. "It's Dr. Mitchell now, General," she said, her voice smooth and dangerous. "And I believe you're in my bed." Arthur stared at her. The memory of a dusty tent in the desert, crashing into the sterile reality of the hospital room. He looked at the woman he had court-martialed, the woman he had thrown away like garbage, realizing she was the only reason he was still breathing. "Impossible," he muttered, shaking his head. I stripped you of your credentials. You were finished." "I was," Clara said, taking a slow step closer. "But karma has a funny way of circling back, doesn't it, Arthur? You see, you kicked me out of the army for being too emotional to save lives. And yet here you are, alive, because of me." She leaned over the railing of his bed, her face inches from his. "But don't get too comfortable, General. Saving you was the easy part. Now comes the bill." The silence in the ICU suite was heavier than the lead apron Clara wore during X-rays. General Arthur Sterling stared at Clara, his face a kaleidoscope of emotions, shock, recognition, fear, and finally, a simmering, impotent rage. "You—" Arthur rasped, his voice gaining a fraction of its old command despite his weakness. "You are supposed to be working at a strip mall clinic in Idaho, or prison. I made sure of it." Clara didn't flinch. She picked up his chart, scanning the post-op vitals with deliberate indifference. "And I'm sure you slept soundly thinking that, Arthur. But talent has a way of surviving even when powerful men try to strangle it." She clicked a pen and made a note. "Heart rate is elevated. Try to calm down, General. It would be a shame to burst your stitches and ruin my artwork." "Get out!" Arthur hissed. He fumbled for the call button on the rail of his bed. "I want Cole. I want my detail. Get me Colonel Reed." "I'm right here, General." The door swung open, and Colonel James Reed stepped in. Reed was Arthur's right hand, a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and lacked a soul. He was holding a briefcase, his eyes scanning the room for threats. When he saw Clara, he paused. He didn't know her, but he recognized the tension in the room immediately. "Sir, is there a problem?" Reed asked, stepping between the bed and Clara, his hand resting instinctively near his hip, though he wasn't armed in the hospital. "Get her out," Arthur commanded, pointing a shaking finger at Clara. "She is compromised. She is a threat to national security. I want a new surgeon, now." Reed turned to Clara, his expression flat. "Doctor, you heard the General. Step away from the patient." Clara laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. She didn't move an inch. Instead, she looked Reed up and down with the bored expression of a teacher dealing with an unruly toddler. "Colonel, isn't it?" Clara said. "If I step away, your boss loses his left leg within the hour. Maybe his life by morning." Reed narrowed his eyes. "That sounds like a threat." "It's a medical prognosis," Clara countered sharply. "The vascular reconstruction I performed is proprietary. It's a technique I developed. The nuances of the graft, the specific microsutures used. There isn't another surgeon in this hospital, hell in this state, who knows how to manage the post-op care for it. If someone else touches that leg, they will trigger a clot. The clot will travel to his lungs. Pulmonary embolism. Game over." She took a step forward, forcing Reed to yield ground. "So go ahead," Clara said, gesturing to the door. "Call Dr. Cole. Call the president for all I care. Fire me. But when General Sterling is an amputee because his ego couldn't handle a woman he wronged, explain that to the press. Arthur went pale. He knew Clara. He knew that despite her insubordination years ago, she never lied about medical facts. She was technically brilliant. That was why he had hated her. She was brilliant, and she didn't fear him. "Stand down, Reed," Arthur whispered, sinking back into his pillows. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a cold, calculating look. "Sir." Reed looked confused. "I said stand down," Arthur barked, wincing as pain shot up his hip. "She stays, for now." Clara smirked, checking the drip rate on his IV. "Wise choice." Arthur looked at Reed. "Open the briefcase. Give her the papers." Reed hesitated, then placed the briefcase on the tray table. He popped the latches and pulled out a thick document. "Standard procedure for high-level personnel, Doctor. Non-disclosure agreement. It bars you from discussing the General's condition, his location, or any personal interactions you have with him." Arthur's eyes bored into Clara's. "And I want an addendum added. You are not to discuss our prior acquaintance. If you mention the court-martial, the 4th Battalion, or Kandahar to anyone, staff press or your therapist, I will have your medical license shredded. I did it once. I'll do it again." Clara looked at the papers. She didn't take them. "I don't sign things without my lawyer," Clara lied. She didn't have a lawyer, but she knew Arthur feared litigation. "This isn't a negotiation," Reed growled. "Everything is a negotiation, Colonel," Clara said softly. "You need me to save the Iron Hammer so he can become Secretary of Defense. I don't need anything from you. I'm the Chief of Trauma Surgery. I have tenure. I have a reputation that you can't touch anymore." She leaned in close to Arthur, ignoring Reed entirely. "I won't sign your NDA, Arthur, because I don't need a piece of paper to keep me professional. I follow HIPAA laws. I won't tell the press about your medical condition." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "But if you try to threaten me again," she whispered, "if you try to bully my staff, or if you treat this hospital like your personal barracks, then I might just accidentally let slip to a reporter that the great General Sterling cried for his mother while he was going under anesthesia." Arthur's face turned a violent shade of red. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me," Clara said, straightening up. "I'm not the lieutenant you broke 10 years ago. I'm the doctor who owns your femoral artery. Play nice." She turned on her heel and walked to the door. "Check his vitals every 15 minutes, Reed. If he turns blue, press the red button. I'll be in the cafeteria." As the door clicked shut, Arthur grabbed a glass of water from his tray and hurled it against the wall. It shattered water dripping down the paint like tears. "Find out everything about her," Arthur seethed to Reed. "Find out who she talks to. Find out where she lives. If she steps one toe out of line, we destroy her." Again. By the next morning, Mercy General Hospital was under siege. It wasn't an enemy army, but something far worse, the 24-hour news cycle. News vans clogged the ambulance bay entrance satellite dishes, pointing toward the grey Seattle sky like mortars. The headline was everywhere: General Sterling injured in training accident. Heroic surgery. Saves Secretary of Defense nominee. Inside, the hospital administration was in a panic. Dr. Henry Cole was sweating through his second shirt of the day. "Clara, you have to talk to them," Henry pleaded, chasing Clara down the hallway. "CNN, Fox, the BBC. They all want a comment from the mystery surgeon. The General's PR team says it's good optics." Clara stopped at the nurse's station, signing off on a drug requisition. "No. Clara, please," Henry begged. "The hospital needs this. Donors are watching. Just a simple statement. The general is resting comfortably. The surgery was a success. That's it." Clara slammed the clipboard down. "I am not a prop, Henry, and I am certainly not a prop for him. Dr. Mitchell." A voice came from behind them. It wasn't a doctor. It was a man in a sharp trench coat, holding a press badge that identified him as a senior correspondent for the Washington Post. He had a face that looked trustworthy, which meant he was dangerous. "Robert Kane," the man said, extending a hand. "Sorry to ambush you inside the secure zone, but I have a way with security guards." Henry looked ready to faint. "Sir, this is a restricted area." Kane ignored Henry and focused his intense gaze on Clara. "You're Dr. Clara Mitchell, top of your class at Johns Hopkins, chief of trauma, and formerly Lieutenant Clara Mitchell, United States Army. Discharge date, August 2015. Cause dishonorable." The hallway went deadly silent. The nurses stopped typing. Henry's mouth fell open. Clara felt a cold chill run down her spine, but her face remained a mask of stone. She turned slowly to face Kane. "You've done your homework, Mr. Kane." "I always do." Kane smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It's a fascinating story. A decorated combat nurse, court-martialed for cowardice and insubordination during a critical supply run. The commanding officer at the time, Major Arthur Sterling, the very same man you just spent 6 hours sewing back together." Kane stepped closer, lowering his voice. "That's a hell of a coincidence, Doctor. Or is it? Some might call it poetic justice. Others might call it conflict of interest." Clara saw the trap immediately. If she engaged, she became the story. If she showed anger, she validated the unstable label Arthur had slapped on her years ago. "I treated a patient, Mr. Kane," Clara said evenly. "The name on the chart doesn't change the anatomy of the injury. That's the oath I took. A better oath, I might add, than the one some soldiers take." Kane's eyebrows shot up. "Is that a comment on General Sterling's service?" "It's a comment on your question," Clara deflected. "Now, unless you have a medical emergency, I suggest you leave my floor before I have security remove you surgically." Kane chuckled, backing away. "I'm going. But Dr. Mitchell, I have sources who say the official report on that supply run in 2015 was missing a few pages, specifically the pages about the civilian casualties the Iron Hammer ordered. If you ever want to set the record straight, here's my card." He slipped a white card into the pocket of her scrubs and walked away whistling. Clara stood frozen. She could feel the card burning against her chest. She had the proof. She had kept the digital logs from that night on an encrypted drive for 10 years. She had never used them because she feared the retaliation. But now... "Clara," Henry whispered, looking terrified. What was he talking about? Dishonorable discharge. "It was a long time ago, Henry," Clara said, her voice hollow. "Forget it. Dr. Mitchell. Code Blue. ICU 4. The intercom blared, shattering the moment. ICU 4. That was Arthur's room. Clara didn't think. She ran. She burst into the ICU suite to find chaos. Colonel Reed was shouting at a nurse. Arthur was thrashing in the bed, gasping for air, his face turning purple. The monitors were screaming. "What happened?" Clara yelled, pushing Reed aside. "He just started seizing," the nurse cried. "I gave him the pain meds you ordered, and 2 minutes later..." Clara looked at the monitor. Anaphylaxis, or a reaction. "What did you give him?" Clara demanded. Morphine, 5 milligrams. He's not allergic to morphine, Clara snapped. She grabbed a penlight and pried Arthur's eyelids open. His pupils were pinpoints. Check the bag, Clara ordered. She grabbed the IV bag hanging on the stand. It was labeled morphine, but the fluid had a slight, barely visible tint. Stop the drip. Clara slashed the line with trauma shears. Get me Narcan and epinephrine. Now. He's been dosed with something else. She started chest compressions. Come on, you son of a bee. She grunted, pumping Arthur's chest. You don't get to die on me. Not yet. Not until I say so. Arthur gasped, his back arching off the mattress. He sucked in a ragged breath, his eyes flying open in terror. He looked up, and the first thing he saw was Clara hovering over him like an avenging angel. Stay with me, Clara commanded, her hands firm on his shoulders. Breathe. As the crash team rushed in to stabilize him, Clara looked over at the trash can. She saw a small, empty vial that didn't belong to the hospital pharmacy. She looked at Colonel Reed. The colonel wasn't looking at Arthur. He was looking at the floor, his jaw tight. A cold realization hit Clara. This wasn't a medical error. Someone had tried to kill the general, and inside this locked room only a few people had access. Arthur stabilized, his breathing shallow. He gripped Clara's wrist, his fingernails digging into her skin. He couldn't speak, but his eyes were wide, pleading. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was the raw fear of a man who realized he was surrounded by wolves. Clara leaned down her lips, brushing his ear, so only he could hear. Someone just tried to overdose you, Arthur. And it wasn't me. She pulled back, looking at Reed, then back to Arthur. It looks like I'm not the only one you've made enemies with. But right now, I'm the only one keeping you alive. Arthur stared at her, tears of shock pricking his eyes. He nodded, a barely perceptible movement. Clara stood up and turned to the room. Clear the room. Colonel Reed, you too. Wait in the hall. I stay with the general, Reed protested. If you stay. Clara said, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. I call the police and have that IV bag tested for fingerprints. Do you want that, Colonel? Reed's face went blank. He stared at Clara for a long second, then nodded once. I'll be outside. As the room cleared, Clara looked down at the man who had ruined her life. He was broken, terrified, and helpless. Welcome to my world, Arthur, she whispered. Now tell me everything. The heavy door of the ICU suite clicked locked, but to General Arthur Sterling it felt less like a sanctuary and more like a coffin. He was trembling not from the pain in his leg, which was a dull, throbbing fire, but from the adrenaline of a man who had just looked death in the face and recognized the assassin. Clara stood by the window, peering through the blinds. She had already disabled the room's internal camera with a piece of surgical tape. Talk, Clara said, not turning around. Why did your own chief of staff just try to stop your heart? Arthur struggled to sit up, his face grey. Water, he croaked. Clara walked to the sink, filled a plastic cup and handed it to him. He drank greedily, some of it spilling onto his hospital gown. It was a pathetic sight, the iron hammer, a man who once decided the fate of nations with a stroke of a pen, now unable to hold a cup without shaking. Reed isn't just a chief of staff, Arthur whispered, his voice gaining a jagged edge. He's a handler. He works for Blackwood Defense, the contractors who built the prototype explosive that put me in here. Clara's eyes narrowed. The training accident? It wasn't an accident, Arthur said bitterly. I found out the guidance chips were faulty. Cheap imports. They were going to kill soldiers in the field to save a few million in manufacturing. I threatened to pull the contract. I told Reed I was going to the Senate Oversight Committee next week. He laughed, a wheezing sound. I thought I was untouchable. I thought the uniform protected me. But money. Money doesn't care about rank. Clara stared at him. So they tried to kill you on the field. It failed. So they sent you here, and Reed was supposed to finish the job quietly. A complication during surgery, or a sudden embolism, and he would have succeeded. Arthur looked at her, his eyes searching hers. If you hadn't been watching. Clara crossed her arms. Don't think I did it for you, Arthur. I did it because I don't let murderers operate in my hospital. It doesn't matter why, Arthur said. He knows he failed. He's outside right now, probably calling in a clean-up crew. He can't let me wake up tomorrow. If I testify, Blackwood loses billions. They will burn this hospital down to get to me. Arthur tried to swing his legs out of bed, but the pain made him cry out. He collapsed back, breathing hard. I need to get to a secure line, he gasped. I need to call General Vance at the Pentagon. He's the only one I trust. The phones in this room are monitored, Clara said calmly. And if you leave this room, Reed will spot you. You can't walk. You're trapped, General. Arthur closed his eyes, defeat washing over him. Then I'm dead. And you're a witness. They'll kill you too. Clara didn't look scared. She looked thoughtful. She walked over to the supply cabinet and pulled out a fresh pair of scrubs. You really don't remember who I am, do you, Arthur? She asked softly. Arthur opened his eyes. I remember you were a troublemaker, a lieutenant who disobeyed orders to secure a perimeter because you wanted to treat a local girl caught in the crossfire. You endangered the unit. I saved a life, Clara corrected him, her voice cold steel. And the perimeter I failed to secure, it was empty. There were no hostiles. You needed a scapegoat because your intel was wrong. You needed to ruin me, to cover your own incompetence. Arthur looked away, shame finally piercing his armor. He knew she was right. He had known it for 10 years. I survived the desert, Arthur, Clara said, tossing a bundle of bandages onto his lap. And I survived the court-martial. I survived losing my career, my pension, and my reputation. Do you think a couple of corporate mercenaries scare me? She moved to the bedside table and grabbed a scalpel, slipping it into her pocket. We're leaving, she announced. Leaving. Arthur balked. I can't walk. And Reed is outside. We aren't going out the front door, Clara said. She walked to the wall behind the bed, where a large panel covered the oxygen and gas hookups. She jammed a flathead screwdriver she had taken from a drawer into the panel seam and twisted. With a groan of metal, the panel popped open, revealing a dark, narrow maintenance crawl space. This building was constructed in the 1950s, Clara explained. They built service tunnels behind the ICU walls for pipe maintenance. It leads to the sub-basement, the old morgue. Arthur looked at the dark hole, then at the pristine, high-tech hospital room. You want the nominee for Secretary of Defense to crawl through a wall. I want the patient to live, Clara said. You have 2 choices, General. You can stay here and wait for Colonel Reed to come back with a syringe full of potassium chloride, or you can trust the woman you called a coward. There was a heavy pounding on the door. Dr. Mitchell. It was Reed's voice, muffled but aggressive. Open up. I have orders to transfer the general. Clara looked at Arthur. Time's up. Arthur gritted his teeth. He looked at the door, then at Clara. For the first time in his life, he surrendered control. Help me up, he said. The maintenance tunnel smelled of dust rust and old copper. It was tight, barely wide enough for Arthur's broad shoulders, but Clara moved through it with practiced ease, pulling the general behind her on a makeshift sled she had fashioned from a bedsheet. Arthur was in agony. Every bump sent shocks of pain through his hip, but he bit down on a rolled-up towel to keep from screaming. Sweat poured down his face, mixing with the grime of the tunnel. "Keep moving," Clara whispered, her voice echoing slightly in the dark. "We're almost to the freight elevator shaft." You navigate this like a rat," Arthur wheezed, trying to sound derogatory, but failing. "I know every inch of this building," Clara replied. "When I first got it here, I worked the night shift. I fixed the plumbing when maintenance was slow. I know how the blood flows in the pipes, and I know how the water flows in the walls." They reached a service hatch. Clara kicked it open, and they tumbled out onto a cold concrete floor. They were in the sub-basement. The air here was frigid. This part of the hospital had been abandoned 10 years ago during a renovation. Old gurneys, broken MRI machines, and stacks of dusty filing cabinets created a maze of shadows. "Where are we?" Arthur asked, shivering. "Old radiology," Clara said, helping him sit up against a concrete pillar. "Lead-lined walls. No cell signal, but also no thermal signatures. If they have drones or scanners, they can't see us in here." "Smart," Arthur admitted. He looked at his leg. The bandages were spotted with fresh blood. "I'm bleeding again." Clara knelt, checking the wound. "You popped a stitch. Apply pressure." She handed him a gauze pad. "I need to find a landline. There's an emergency phone in the old security booth down the hall." "Wait." Arthur grabbed her arm. His grip was weak. "Why are you doing this? You hate me. You have every right to leave me here to rot." Clara looked down at his hand, then up at his face. In the dim emergency lighting, her blue eyes burned. "Because I took an oath, Arthur. Do no harm. That oath means something to me, even if your oath meant nothing to you." She pulled her arm away gently. "And maybe I want you to live long enough to answer for what you did. Not to a court, but to the world." She stood up. "Stay here. If you hear footsteps and it's not me, use this." She handed him the scalpel. Arthur looked at the small blade. It was a surgeon's tool, not a soldier's weapon. "This is it. It's sharp enough to sever a carotid artery," Clara said grimly. "Just don't miss." Clara moved into the darkness, her footsteps silent. Arthur watched her go, a strange feeling swelling in his chest. It was respect. Reluctant, painful respect. He sat alone in the dark for 5 minutes, listening to the drip of a leaking pipe. Then he heard it, the sound of the elevator doors prying open at the far end of the basement. Clang. Heavy boots on concrete, not Clara's sneakers. "Sweep the area," a voice echoed. It was distorted by a radio, but Arthur recognized the cadence. It was a tactical team. "Reed said they went into the walls," the voice said. "Check the heat signatures." "Can't, sir. Too much lead interference. We have to do it manually. Flashlights on. Kill on sight." Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs. He gripped the scalpel. He was a sitting duck. He couldn't run. He couldn't fight. He saw the beam of a tactical flashlight cut through the gloom sweeping over the old equipment. It was getting closer. Suddenly a loud crash echoed from the opposite side of the room. A metal tray clattered to the floor. "Contact left," the soldier shouted. "Move, move!" The boots thundered away from Arthur toward the noise. Arthur realized what Clara had done. She had created a distraction. She was drawing them away from him. "She's crazy," Arthur whispered. "She's going to get herself killed." But Clara wasn't just a distraction. She was a hunter. In the shadows of the old MRI room, Clara waited. She held a defibrillator paddle in each hand. She had ripped the charging unit from an old crash cart and hot-wired it to a heavy-duty battery pack she found in maintenance. The ready light blinked green. The first mercenary rounded the corner, his rifle raised. He wore black tactical gear and night vision goggles. He didn't see Clara pressed flat against the top of the MRI machine. As he passed underneath, Clara dropped. She landed on his back, the impact driving the air from his lungs. Before he could shout, she slammed the paddles onto the exposed skin of his neck, just above his tactical vest. Zap! The man convulsed violently and dropped like a stone, unconscious before he hit the floor. Clara rolled off him, grabbing his radio and his sidearm. She checked the chamber. Loaded. "Target down!" the radio crackled. "Report!" Clara pressed the transmit button. She didn't whisper. She spoke in her command voice, the voice of Lieutenant Mitchell. "Man down," she said calmly. "You're in my operating room now, boys, and I'm about to start the amputation." She ditched the radio and melted back into the shadows. Back at the pillar, Arthur heard the transmission. He stared at the darkness in disbelief. A smile, grim and bloody, tugged at the corner of his mouth. "That's my girl," he muttered. But the victory was short-lived. "Cut the chatter," Reed's voice boomed through the basement. He had come down himself. "She's one woman with a medical degree. You are elite contractors. Flank her. Flush her out with gas." A canister skittered across the floor, hissing. Tear gas. White smoke began to fill the basement rapidly. Clara coughed, pulling her scrub top over her nose. She couldn't fight them in the gas. She needed to get back to Arthur. She moved low, navigating by memory. She found Arthur coughing, his eyes streaming. "We have to move," she rasped, grabbing his arm. "I can't." Arthur gagged. "The gas! Get up!" Clara shouted, hauling him to his feet. "There's an exhaust vent in the laundry chute. Come on!" They stumbled through the smoke. Bullets sparked against the concrete around them. Ping, ping. There, a laser sight cut through the smoke, landing on Arthur's back. Clara didn't think. She spun Arthur around, shoving him behind a heavy steel filing cabinet. A split second later, a bullet tore through the air where Arthur had been standing. It grazed Clara's arm, tearing through the fabric and slicing skin. She cried out, falling back. "Clara!" Arthur shouted, grabbing her. "I'm fine!" She gritted her teeth, clutching her bleeding arm. "Just a graze. Keep moving." They reached the laundry chute, a large industrial opening used for dirty linens. It led down to the boiler room, but it was a straight drop. "Jump!" Clara ordered. "Are you insane?" Arthur yelled over the gunfire. "The linens are at the bottom. It's a soft landing. Go." The mercenaries were closing in. Shadowy figures emerged from the smoke. Arthur looked at the chute, then at Clara. He grabbed her hand. "Together," he said. He didn't wait for an answer. He pulled her with him, and they plunged into the darkness of the chute just as a hail of bullets chewed up the metal rim above them. They tumbled down, sliding through the slick metal tunnel, picking up speed until whump. They landed in a massive pile of dirty hospital sheets in the boiler room. The air was hot and loud with the roar of the furnaces. Arthur groaned, rolling onto his back. I think I broke my other leg." Clara crawled over to him, checking him quickly. "No, just bruised. You're tough, old man." She checked her own arm. It was bleeding sluggishly. She tied a strip of sheet around it, tight. "We bought maybe 5 minutes," Clara said, looking at the heavy iron door of the boiler room. "They'll come down the stairs." "We can't outrun them," Arthur said, his voice grave. "We need a weapon. A real one." Clara looked around the boiler room. It was filled with high-pressure steam pipes, valves, and chemicals. Her eyes landed on the main pressure valve for the hospital's sterilization system. "I don't have a gun," Clara said, her eyes gleaming with a dangerous idea. "But I have something better. Physics." She pointed to the main steam line directly in front of the door. "Arthur, can you shoot?" she asked, handing him the pistol she had taken from the mercenary. Arthur took the gun. His hand was steady now. The soldier had returned. "I never miss." "Good," Clara said. "When that door opens, don't shoot the men. Shoot the valve." Arthur looked at the red valve wheel on the pipe. It was labeled "Warning Superheated Steam, 400 psi." He nodded slowly. "Understood." They waited. The handle on the iron door began to turn. "Get ready," Clara whispered, crouching behind a concrete barrier. The door flew open. Colonel Reed stood there, flanked by 3 men. "End of the line, General," Reed shouted, raising his weapon. "Now!" Clara screamed. Arthur fired. The bullet struck the valve mechanism perfectly. Boom! The pipe exploded. A jet of superheated white steam blasted out with the force of a jet engine directly into the doorway. The screams were immediate and horrifying. Reed and his men were engulfed in a blinding, scalding cloud that threw them backward into the hallway. Their weapons clattered to the floor as they scrambled away, blinded and burned. "Go out the back exit," Clara yelled. She grabbed Arthur, and they limped out the rear service door into the rainy Seattle night. They were alive, but they were out in the open, and the night was far from over. The rain in Seattle was unforgiving. It lashed against Clara and Arthur as they huddled behind a dumpster in the dark service alley behind the hospital. Arthur was pale, his adrenaline fading, leaving him shaking with the onset of shock. The makeshift bandage on Clara's arm was soaked through, but she didn't complain. We can't go far." Arthur chattered, his teeth clicking together. "My leg, it's done." Clara scanned the alley. Sirens were wailing in the distance, getting closer. But were they police coming to help, or Reed's contacts coming to clean up the mess? "We don't need to go far," Clara said, her eyes locking onto a black sedan parked under a flickering street lamp about 50 yards away. The engine was idling. "Who is that?" Arthur asked, gripping the pistol with a trembling hand. "Our exit strategy," Clara said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the wet, crumpled business card Robert Kane had given her earlier. She had texted the number on it the moment they entered the laundry chute. The text had been simple: North Alley. "Bring a camera. Now." Clara waved her arm. The sedan's headlights flashed twice. "It's the reporter." Arthur realized horror dawning on him. "You called the press, Clara. I'm a classified asset. If I talk to him, my career is over. I'll be court-martialed for leaking secrets." Clara grabbed the lapels of his wet hospital gown and pulled him close. "Arthur, look at me. Your career is already over. Reed tried to kill you. Blackwood Defense owns your superiors. The only thing that keeps you alive tonight is if you become so famous, so public, that they can't touch you without the whole world watching." She pointed at the car. "That camera is your shield. Use it." Before Arthur could argue, the back door of the hospital burst open. Colonel Reed stumbled out. He was a nightmare to look at. His face was blistered red from the steam, his uniform clinging to his skin. He was blind in one eye, but he still held his weapon. 2 more mercenaries poured out behind him, coughing but functional. "There!" Reed screamed, pointing his gun at the dumpster. "Kill them! Run!" Clara shouted. She hauled Arthur up, acting as a crutch on his left side. They hobbled toward the sedan. "Drop them!" Reed yelled, raising his rifle. Suddenly, the sedan's doors flew open. Robert Kane stepped out, but he wasn't alone. A cameraman with a massive shoulder-mounted rig jumped out the bright LED floodlight, blindingly turning on. "Rolling!" the cameraman shouted. "General Sterling!" Kane yelled, his voice projecting like a ringmaster. "Is it true that Blackwood Defense just attempted to assassinate you inside an American hospital?" The bright light hit Reed and his mercenaries. They froze. They were Black Ops contractors. They operated in the dark. Being caught on a high-definition news camera in the middle of downtown Seattle was their worst nightmare. "Camera!" Reed hissed, shielding his face. "Abort, abort! Shoot them!" one mercenary argued. "Not on live stream, you idiot!" Reed snarled. He looked at Arthur, then at the camera lens that was zooming in on his burned face. He knew it was over. If he pulled the trigger now, he wouldn't just be a killer. He'd be the most wanted man in America by morning. Reed lowered his weapon, spitting blood on the wet pavement. He looked at Clara with pure hatred. "You're dead, Mitchell," he mouthed. Then the mercenaries grabbed Reed and scrambled into a waiting van, peeling out of the alley just as the first police cruisers screeched onto the scene. Clara and Arthur collapsed against Kane's sedan. The reporter rushed over, looking at the blood on their clothes with a mix of concern and professional glee. "I assume this is an exclusive?" Kane asked, signaling the cameraman to keep rolling. Arthur looked at the camera. He looked at Clara, who was holding her bleeding arm, standing tall despite the exhaustion. She had saved him. She had outsmarted a kill team, navigated a tunnel system, and weaponized the media to save his life. Arthur straightened his posture. He looked directly into the lens. "Yes," Arthur said, his voice finding its old iron cadence. "I want to make a statement. I want to talk about the defective explosives that killed my men. I want to talk about the corruption in the Pentagon. And I want to talk about the surgeon who just saved my life." He put a hand on Clara's shoulder. "Her name is Dr. Clara Mitchell, and she is the finest soldier I have ever known." 3 months later, the Senate hearing room was packed. It was standing room only. The air conditioning fought a losing battle against the heat of the television lights and the crush of bodies. "General Sterling, please state your name for the record." Arthur sat at the witness table. He looked different. He walked with a cane, now his left leg permanently stiff, but he wore a pristine suit, not a uniform. He had resigned his commission the day after the alleyway incident. "Arthur James Sterling," he said into the microphone. "General." The senator leading the committee began peering over his glasses. "We have reviewed the evidence provided by you and Dr. Mitchell, the audio recordings from the boiler room, the forensic evidence of the tampered IV bags. It is damning." The senator paused. "Blackwood Defense has filed for bankruptcy as of this morning. Indictments have been handed down for Colonel Reed and 12 others. But there is one loose end." The room went quiet. "The matter of Dr. Clara Mitchell's court-martial in 2015. You were the presiding officer. You claimed she was unfit for duty. Do you wish to amend that statement?" Arthur turned in his chair. He looked toward the back of the room. Clara was sitting in the gallery. She wasn't wearing scrubs. She wore a simple navy dress. She looked tired. She had been working double shifts to deal with the influx of patients coming to the hero surgeon's hospital. But she looked at peace. Arthur turned back to the microphone. "Senator," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion, 10 years ago, I made a decision based on arrogance. I valued obedience over morality. I punished a lieutenant for showing the very humanity we claim to defend. He took a deep breath. Dr. Mitchell didn't just save my life 3 months ago. She saved my soul. She showed me that true strength isn't about following orders. It's about doing what is right, even when it costs you everything. Arthur pulled a piece of paper from his pocket. I'm officially requesting that the Department of Defense expunge Clara Mitchell's record, restore her rank with full back pay, and award her the Distinguished Service Cross for her actions in Kandahar, and for her actions in Seattle. The room erupted. Flashbulbs popped like fireworks. People stood up and cheered. Clara didn't cheer. She simply nodded, a small, sad smile touching her lips. She didn't want the medal. She didn't want the rank. She just wanted the stain on her name gone. She stood up quietly and slipped out the back doors, while the applause was still roaring. Outside on the steps of the Capitol, the sun was shining. Running away again, Doctor. Clara turned. Arthur had followed her out, limping heavily on his cane. I have a shift in 6 hours, Arthur, she said. Some of us still work for a living. Arthur stopped at the top of the stairs. He looked old, tired, but lighter than he had been in years. I'm sorry, he said. It was simple. No flowery language, just the truth. I know, Clara said. What will you do now? Arthur asked. The army wants you back. They're offering you a command. Clara laughed, shaking her head. No, I'm done with wars, Arthur. I heal people. That's my fight. She walked down a few steps, then paused and looked back at him. But if you ever need a hip replacement, she smirked, call someone else. I'm too expensive for you. Arthur chuckled, a genuine sound. He watched her walk away, disappearing into the crowd of tourists and city workers. The iron hammer had been broken and reforged, and the woman who held the hammer had walked away not as a subordinate, not as a victim, but as the only thing she ever wanted to be. Free. What a ride. From a disgraced nurse to the surgeon who brought down a corrupt military empire. Clara Mitchell's story proves that the truth always finds a way to the surface. General Sterling thought he could bury his past, but he learned the hard way that you never underestimate the person who holds your life in their hands. It's a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about rank or authority. It's about integrity, skill, and the courage to do the right thing when no one is watching. If you enjoyed this story of high-stakes medical drama and ultimate karma, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Share this video with a friend who loves a good revenge plot, and tell me in the comments, would you have saved the general? Jahana, thanks to Ross. Watching.